particular resolution, vesting land in that church, in that community, is meant to support the church, yes. It's meant to support the community, yes. But it is part of government's broader agenda to support the third sector and the church community in the religious community so that we can get our young people and our communities back involved. And Mr. President, the reality of it is when I looked at this resolution and the information coming out of the other place, it talks about the church community growing. It talks about how many persons are now accommodated at temporary locations because they can't fit anymore on the space that was there. I always have said, Mr. President, that people who say that young people don't go to church anymore are those that don't go to church themselves, because when I go to church on a Sunday, and I'm sure that when Senator Monroe Knight goes to her church on a Sunday, there are young people everywhere, active, sold out, very much involved. So sometimes when you look at resolutions like this, it may seem like it's a vesting resolution, and it is. It is an acquisition legislation, piece of legislation, and it is resolution, and it is. It is allowing us to lease land, very much so, true, but it really is an investment in our communities, and in this case, the community in St. John. So, Mr. President, what we are looking for here now is what I'm going to go to, I should say, is that the Ministry of Housing and Lands, in engaging with the church, with the owners, with the facilitators of the church, looked at the land value under the Barbados Revenue Authority. And the land value under the Barbados Revenue Authority, they rationalized it cost is valued at approximately $175,000. They valued it at approximately $5 per square foot. And then they have, together with the church, it wasn't that they imposed a price, together with the church, they agreed on a purchase price, not of $175,000, Mr. President, but of $28,000. And that is the cost that we are looking at, Mr. President. And so now, where we are proposing to go in the order number 8 is in facilitating a netting off of the sale of the land with the lease of the adjacent piece of land to allow for the expansion of the church. And so, Mr. President, I don't want to make this into a lengthy debate. I don't want to go into all kinds of tangential things that are not necessarily related to the matter, but I want for us to be able to approve the resolutions allowing, in the first instance, for the sale of approximately 2.7 meters of land, 2.7 thousand meters of land, 3,700 meters of land, and the lease of 3,100 meters of land to the Pilgrim Holiness Church at Bath Village in Welches in St. John. And with these very few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution do not pass.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy President. Senator Warrior.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too will be brief in my submissions on these two resolutions. Mr. President, we don't have any objection to the church, the swap in the properties to allow for the church to expand. The church does play a vital role within the community in which it exists. It's a very vibrant church with a number of activities, and I think it is one of the focal points for that community in particular, which can boast of one of the communities in St. John with still a vibrant youth group and youth activities happening within the community. And oftentimes that area is utilized for activities within the community, which is good. And these are things which we need to encourage and we need to support throughout the country. Getting the church involved in community activities, getting the church involved with young people, getting the church involved with the developmental process, because as a country, we are facing a number of challenges, in particular with our youth, to the extent I was having a conversation yesterday, will not don't want to go into detail about the conversation, but persons respond that our young people are in crisis. And that is the reality of the way how some people feel. And when you are in crisis like that, the best avenue for you to approach would be the church, because the church offers that opportunity for guidance, because we need proper guidance in this country, especially now where many people are choosing vanity over what is right. And this is where the church comes in terms of the principle which they teach, the teachings of the Bible, and at least offering persons hope and knowing that there is hope within a country and some place in which to turn to. The only issue that we would have, and the leader of government business went so far to say how benevolent the whole process was in working with and helping the church and the importance of it. So we wondered why couldn't the $28,000 have not been netted off and be given as, instead of holding out for $28,000 for the church, to either raise in a loan or raise in tithes and offerings every Sunday now for Lord knows how long, in order to raise this $28,000. Why couldn't this not have been netted off? And the same way that we could afford to give precious real estate in Barbados to a multi-billion-dollar bank, why couldn't we have at least net off that $28,000 for a small rural church in Barbados, so that the parishioners will not have to struggle to find that $28,000 in addition to the funds that they will need to utilize in terms of expanding? That could have been a gift and a grant from the government, which goes towards the development of the church, and I'm certain it will be seen in good spirit. No one in Barbados will argue with it. You will not have any argument from the opposition with regard to it. We would actually be quite pleased if you made the decision to do that. But on one hand, you want to say that, oh, we are being so joyful and with open arms and working with the church, but yet so you don't treat the church with the same level of latitude with which you gave to a multi-billion-dollar bank in giving them prime real estate in Barbados for not even a penny, not even a dollar, not even a hate me, but for this small church, you are demanding $28,000. Could you not have done better? Where was the conscience then? Where was the conscience at the negotiation table then? I think if you had a conscience at the negotiation table, zero would have been in that position, and the church would be joyful, rejoicing, no, they have a start in terms of the building. That is money that has been taken away from food hampers, which the church would normally give to the community. That is money that can no longer go towards the homework program within the community. That is money that can no longer go to assisting an elderly person in the community with repairs to the house or painting up the house for the Christmas holiday. So if you really want to have a conscience, prove that you do have a conscience by making this gesture of the $28,000. But Mr. President, we support the swap of the land. I am glad that the senator cleared up the information with regard to the actual ownership of the land, because we do know that after the debate in the other place, that there were some sentiments suggesting that the land was not necessarily owned by the government, but there's a third party who had an interest in the property. So I'm hoping that after that clarification today, that matter has truly been put to rest, and that we have a fair exchange of the property. And you just need to correct one thing, the $28,000, even if you give it back to them twice, double the amount so that they can invest in the community activities of the church. That could come out of a grant from the CAF loan as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Worrell. Senator Reverend Morris.
Thank you, Mr. President. for recognizing me to speak on this most important issue. I must say at the onset, sir, that those of my colleagues who were sitting with me at lunch did hear me say that we anticipate the speech that the opposition would make. We did anticipate it, and we knew that he was going to, in fact, we believed that he was going to speak about the land down the road, and he did not disappoint. He spoke about it.
Your transactions are obvious. So you have to speak on that.
Sir, I rise to speak on this particular matter. As you know, sir, I am an Anglican priest. I may not look so, but I am. And I followed this particular issue when it was debated and the response by the Anglican Church. And the Anglican Church then was claiming that the land belonged to the Anglican Church. That was the claim. But yet, the Anglican Church admitted to paying rent for the land. And my question is, if you are paying rent for the land, how could it be yours? And I was a bit taken aback by that. And I did my own investigations, which revealed that even that the land was not owned by the Anglican Church, it was owned by the plantation, and the Anglican Church did have a church there, and it was, well, I can say use the word abandoned, because it was not in use, and it was only drawn to the attention then, I think it was the archdeacon of the church was drawn to the attention that there were some vestments and vessels in there that were used, that could have been used even if for historical significance. It was then that they went and collected them. But then the next thing we heard is that the Anglican Church owned the land after it was, again, to be entered into business with another church. And I'm saying, sir, that they cannot be paying rent and still say you're the owner. They cannot be owning the land. But I believe, sir, that on a broader scale, there's a lot of other church land that we have in Barbados, and I wonder if the Anglican Church itself, as a matter of reparations, even offer some of the land that it has to residents of this country on which they can live and they can build properties. As a matter of reparations, sir. There's no doubt that the Anglican Church was one of the largest landowners in Barbados. One of the largest landowners. So to the extent, sir, that if you look at the physical structure of Barbados, you will see, sir, that initially there were two hills, one near Government Hill and the other near Bishop's Court Hill. The two ended at Pine Road, and the two shall, and neither the twain meet. One represented, sir, the political authority in Barbados, and the other represented the religious and moral authority in Barbados. And while the piece of land that represented the political authority in Barbados still remains, the one that represented the moral, religious and moral authority in Barbados is it is abandoned. That's where the bishop used to live. And we have a whole set of land up there that can be put to proper use. If the Anglican Church does not want to use it, say so, let somebody acquire, but at the same time, let the people of Barbados who slaved on these plantations, sir, who slaved on these plantations, who now would want to own some of this land, let them have it. In addition, sir, we have a lot of abandonment by the same church. Rectories abandoned. St. Joseph land up there. Concept Bay too. Concept Bay. St. Lucy's Rectory, all of that is abandoned. St. Peter's Rectory, sir. St. Peter's Church residents, all of that land, but I'm told that it is sold now. But I'm saying that, and when you look at it, sir, a lot of rectors now are not living in the rectories. They are living in their homes. You may say that the congregation now paying their mortgages and their rent, but that's a different matter. But the synod needs to be impacted on, and the trustees need to be impacted on to do something about this land that has been abandoned. Because if somebody goes now, you can hear their land is that of the Anglican Church. We have too much land by the church, owned by the church, that is abandoned and is in wastage. Huh? It's wastage, sir. And something needs to be done about it. But then, we would hear from the same church, as we heard last year's independent service, that nothing has happened in this country since 2018. Yeah, that was said in the sermon last year, sir. And I think these things are wrong. To see that we have all of this land, and our people do not have access to it. Wastage, sir. Bishop's Court Hill, all of that, and that to me is an eyesore. Because you may, sir, as I said, as a student of history, sir, we put certain things together. And we are talking about the moral decay in Barbados. We are talking about people don't like church anymore. But isn't it the abandonment, the very abandonment of the symbol of religious and moral authority? Couldn't that have been contributed to it, sir? That's all I'm asking. But what we are doing, we cannot have this land held by a few. This country and the church needs to pay reparations and do see if it has in its heart the same approach that the government took. I have said over and over, sir, that one of the greatest things in Barbados was the greatest political event in Barbados was the attainment of adult suffrage. In my view, the greatest social event in Barbados was the passing of the Territory Freehold Purchase Act, because it allowed people to own their land. It allowed people to own their land. People that work, their foreparents and even they themselves, work on their lives, pour their lives on land. Their sweat and their tears, sometimes killing themselves, almost do kill themselves, only to watch the fruits of their labor taken by someone else. And then there must be something wrong when vast tracts of land are held by a few people. But worst of all, when those few people allow that land to go into wastage. I believe, sir, as a matter of fact, the church did attempt to sell some lands, and they're sold at market price. No, good God, sir. And I call on you, Lord, here now. If you have people, poor people coming to your church, poor people supporting your church every Sunday, couldn't it be a good thing to let some of these poor people in the churches own some of the land? Can you sell it to them at reasonable prices? Rather than trying to have directories? My feeling now, sir, is that the church, the government, before it gets too far, should really compulsorily acquire the land at St. Lucie. I feel so. The directory and the whole set of land that is there, so that the people in this country can have land. Because I believe that one of the things that we must take into consideration, and I say this, that at independence, sir, when we were declared independent, one of the things that should have come with that independence should have been agrarian reform. And that agrarian reform did not take place with independence. The status quo remained. The people that owned the land before remain the owners of the land. But if you check a place like Cuba, sir, and I'm going to tell you something about that. If you check a place like Cuba, as soon as Castro was able to come to power, what he did was to ensure that every Cuban family had access to 27 hectares of land. And despite all that has been done to the Cubans, despite the sanctions, despite all that was happening to them, they were able to survive. You know why? Because they were able to use the land to their own advantage and survive to this day, whatever was thrown at them. We in this country must stop seeing land as dirt and start seeing it as capital. That is why we must invest in our people. All institutions, all of them. We must see our people not only just as employees, but also entrepreneurs of themselves. And I'm saying to you that when you give people title to land, it's not just a piece of paper. It is collateral. That's what we have in collateral. And even now, if we want to see to it, I mean, look, there's so much that could be done with this land owned by churches. You can build community centers. Even in districts where you own those lands, set up buildings there where you can bring the church to the people. Every year we talk about Christmas and Jesus coming. Jesus coming new. But that means that Jesus came and dwelt in the midst of humanity where they were. And we can take people. I remember the days when St. Peter's Parish Church used to hold school in Black Bess, church in Black Bess. Maybe that's why I was able to become a preacher, you know, because it was there. But we need to invest in the people. And the Anglican Church needs to get rid of some of this land by repairing all the damage that has been done to the people of this land, the very people that work the land, sir. But more than that, giving up this land is social justice and human dignity. We move beyond economics and we talk about human dignity, justice, because for too long, the history of land has been a history of theft. It has been a history of exploitation, and inherited privilege. When the people own their land, they gain respect. They gain status in their community. And then we can enfranchise our people by allowing them access to the land that is there. And the church, the Anglican Church, must be, not only the Anglican Church too, because all of them, the Anglican, the Methodist, the Moravians, Catholics, all of them. I remember, if you read the documents, the person that brought Methodism to the Caribbean, Nathaniel Gilbert, the people didn't have land, they could not go into churches, and he preached to them at his back doorstep. The Moravians in 1816, they paraded and jumped up. Thank God our slaves were not involved in the rebellion. But yet, we have people, still the descendants of those same slaves, not owning the land. And then the Anglican Church now is using this land, not for the benefit of the poor people, but to further enrich those who already have it. I believe, sir, that the time has really, really come that we can have reparations right here by some of the institutions that hold this land in Barbados. Because I believe that part of freeing the people is giving them access to this most glorious land. The Bible has always said, if your own land is a blessing. But I beg the church to bless some of our people. Bless some of our people. That is what we need to do. In that way, sir, we will be addressing and doing the work that Jesus had in his sayings, to look after the poor, to look after the sick, to look after those who are thirsty, to look after those who are captive, not for our own enrichment, sir. I thank you.
Amen, Senator. Thank you very much, Senator Reverend Rogers. Morris, sorry, but there, again, my priest mixed up. Senator Reverend Morris. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, thank you very much. I beg to move this resolution do not pass.
The question is that this resolution, and this is resolution number 7, do now pass. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Order number 8, in the name of the Honorable Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve, in accordance with Section 5 of the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, Chapter 225, the lease to the Pilgrim Holiness Church, the Wesleyan Holiness Church, or parts of land, the property of the state, situate at Bath, in the parish of St. John, in this island, and more particularly described in the first schedule thereto, on the terms and conditions set out in the second schedule thereto, for the purpose to operate its church services.
Mr. President, I beg to move this resolution do not pass.
The question is that this resolution do not pass. Will those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it. This resolution is now passed.
Order number 12, sir. Order number 12, in the name of the Honorable Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of the resolution to approve in accordance with Section 5 of the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, Chapter 255, the vesting in the National Housing Corporation of a parcel of land, the property of the state, situated at River Bay in the parcel of St. Lucie in this island, for sale to qualified tenants under the Tenantry Freehold Purchase Act, Chapter 239B, and for housing development.
Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. In the same vein as the resolution which we just discussed, this is a matter of originally plantation land, and it's a non-plantation land, but I think we've just heard discussion around a 1980s piece of legislation. In 1980, the then Prime Minister of Barbados, Right Excellent Tom Adams, Tom JMGM Adams, I think that's the Right Honorable, passed a piece of legislation, or pioneered a piece of legislation, which has been transformational for ordinary Barbadians all these years later. That legislation, Mr. President, was a Tenantry Freehold Purchasing Act, and I'm going to speak about that throughout my presentation. Mr. President, this resolution, while it talks about the sale of the land to the eligible tenants on that land, there's another component which speaks to those persons who are elderly also on the land, and I will get to that in a minute. But very simply put, Mr. President, this resolution is a proposal to vest approximately 12.266 square meters of land at River Bay in St. Lucie in the National Housing Corporation for onward sale to qualified tenants under the legislation that I just spoke about. And as I did a short while ago, I want to go back into the history of this process. In 1986, Mr. President, at the time, the Ministry of Housing and Lands granted permission for a number of persons to live at this land in River Bay. It was specifically for residential purposes, and it was a part of a World Bank National Urban Low-Income Development Project. Now, when we talk about loans and the government having loans and not knowing where the money is going, and we have no declaration as to what the money is for, every single loan that I have seen has a clear purpose and an assignment in all instances. So it is unfortunate to ever have anyone say we don't know where the money is going. This particular project, Mr. President, was for national urban low-income persons. This project ran for approximately a year, March 17, 1986 to March 6, 1987. And it specifically focused on what I've just said, improving housing conditions and infrastructure for low-income dwellers in Barbados. And the World Bank, through this facility, provided financial support and expertise to facilitate the project's implementation. So during that time, Mr. President, they found a number of things. That access to this particular community at River Bay was difficult, especially after rainfall. They found that without adequate road infrastructure, that it hindered the access of emergency vehicles and the ability for persons themselves to reach their own homes. And so remediation efforts needed to be undertaken. By the time 1988 rolled around, Mr. President, the persons living on that land had increased, and you saw that there were a number of persons who had not been given permission to live on the land, unlike what originally had happened, and that there were a number of persons illegally living on that land. It was brought to the ministry's attention just on the eastern St. Lucie District Hospital at the time, and rental accounts were then created for these persons by 1993, and they were charged an interim rent. They then were sent letters also in 1993 informing them that with the intention of reviewing the rent, that the tenancy was being regularized. They were provided with a regularized rent to allow for them to convert occupancy on lands which they had occupied illegally into one which was now being transitioned. They started paying rent from January 1, 1993, Mr. President. Now, here's where the structure of the Tenantry Freehold Purchasing Act becomes important. This was non-plantation land. There were 21 lots available at the time. 10 of them currently are still occupied by tenants. Approval was then sought and granted for 10 of those occupied lots to be sold under the Tenantry's Freehold Purchasing Act. They were surveyed and tenanted, and the tenants are qualified under this legislation by virtue of the fact that they had been living on the land for more than 5 years and paying rent for more than 5 years to have title of that land transferred to them. It is clear, though, Mr. President, that while we are regularizing persons who were there illegally, persons who were there legally and were paying rent before, those persons are all accounted for, but there is still vacant land, and that vacant land is not accounted for or was never a part of the original Tenantry's Freehold Purchasing Act. But it did allow for the remainder of the lots to be subdivided, and that subdivision would then allow for the construction of new housing capacity for persons in that area. So the lots, Mr. President, were meant to be sold at $2.50 per square foot. By a cabinet decision in 1981, and I did speak about pensioners living on that land, 1981, under Tom Adams' administration, the decision was taken that any pensioners residing on land would receive their land free of cost. There are at present, Mr. President, approximately 7 old age pensioners residing at River Bay in St. Lucie, and under this resolution, they will receive their land free of cost. That's important, Mr. President. This site also, aside from the persons who are going to have their lots transferred to them free of cost or transferred to them for title in the other categories, also there are about 11 of those lots being proposed additionally for the purpose of new housing development. And the lands at River Bay will then allow us to continue the process of regularizing the status of the residents that are there, improving living conditions that I've spoken about earlier in terms of roads and access to communities, and it will allow for further infrastructural improvements in the area. This is what this government is doing for Barbadians in this rural community. We want to make sure that people have the dignity of a home that they own, and they own a piece of the rock. But, Mr. President, before the landowner originally of this land passed, he had a specific ask. And he had a specific ask that this land be made available for those that are underprivileged. And the government has sought to ensure that under this piece of legislation, they're able to make land available and give clear title to persons who ordinarily would not be able to have access to that. So as at May 2025, 29 residents have already received their title to the long-occupied lots, with 111 of 115 lots at this location, Mr. President. But this one, no, let me just correct that. This is now, we just spoke about Bath, St. John. Bath is under being regularized. There are 29 residents that would have received title deeds to their lots. 111 of 115 have been conveyed. And that is another community that has had the benefit of the Tenantries Freehold Purchasing Act. I just want to make a brief point here, Mr. President, on the other communities across the country that have also been benefiting from government doing exactly what I have just taken the time to describe all across the country. Searles in Christchurch, Poole in St. John, Coconut Hall in St. Lucie, Colleton, St. Lucie, Clifton, St. Philip, Concordia North, Dodds in St. Philip, and Ginger Works also, Mr. President. These are all areas that the government is taking the actions that I have just been describing. And I want to close by making a point here, Mr. President, because I mentioned the World Bank, and I mentioned the loan structure for Barbados, and I mentioned some of the commentary that typically comes up whenever Barbados comes with a loan. And whenever that comes up, and we hear sometimes in different places about how the Prime Minister always has these loans and how the Prime Minister travels all the time to get different things. That's part of the housing solution for Barbados. It's part of the road infrastructure solution for Barbados. And I want to make a point, and I know that the Honorable Prime Minister will probably not want me to say what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think we have put her in an untenable position at times. I want to say something in this chamber. Last week, Thursday, I saw on Instagram, we were preparing for the first shipment to Jamaica. The Prime Minister was in the Bridgetown port meeting with SEDEMA and DEM as the first shipments were going off to Jamaica. And Barbadians saw her there. But I am certain that besides those of us who were in cabinet who knew her travel schedule, most Barbadians did not connect the fact that the day before they had seen her in Paris, meeting with officials in Paris and posting it on her page. When we say that Barbados is 166 square miles, and we cannot exist in a vacuum by ourselves, and we have to interact with the world, and the cost of silence, as we've heard from another honorable member on this side of the table, is not an option. A prime minister, a leader of a country, has to engage with the rest of the world. But when a prime minister is under such pressure to make sure she's balancing what she has to do for the country overseas with what she has to do for the country at home, that she leaves a country on a Tuesday evening, flies through the night, lands on a Wednesday morning, gets to a meeting on the Wednesday, and flies back out on the Thursday morning, lands and goes straight from the airport to pack and to see SEDEMA and DEM to make sure that the response to Jamaica is what it is. We are putting our leadership in untenable positions for political gimmickry, and it's not the right thing to do. It's not the right thing to do. A prime minister who has the burden of leading a country under difficult circumstances has to be here and there. And while some of us sit in the comfort of unaccountability to the public, she has to be able to navigate, making sure that in all instances, at home and abroad, she represents Barbados's agenda. And so, Mr. President, this particular resolution on providing access, ownership, a piece of the rock, providing access services to people in the River Bay area of St. Lucie and in all the other areas that I have just been describing, requires Barbados to engage at home, yes, to have access to the resources at home, but it also requires us to be able to have access to the resources like the same World Bank facility of 1986 that was focused on this particular community in the St. Lucie area, and to ensure that there were low-income housing solutions for Barbadians. This is what governance is about. This is what government has to do. And this is a government that looks after people, all people. And this resolution is for poor people. And it once again says this government supports people in this country. This government cares. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution do not pass.
Thank you, Senator Cummings. The question is that this resolution do not pass. Will those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The things the ayes have it, this resolution is now passed.
Mr. President, I beg to move that having the government...
Mr. President, permission to revert to messages from Her Excellency, the President.
Thank you very much. There was another message from Her Excellency, which was neatly tucked under the first message, and that message reads, dated November 5th, 2025. Dear Mr. President, I wish to inform you that I shall be away from the island on Thursday, the 6th of November, 2025 on vacation leave. In accordance with the provisions of Section 33 of the Constitution, the Very Reverend Dr. Jeffrey Douglas Gibson will perform the functions of President during my absence. As the Honorable the Senate will not be meeting prior to the departure, it will not be possible for the usual formal message to be sent to your chamber. Will you therefore please bring my absence formally to the attention of the Honorable the Senate when next it meets? Signed by the President on November 5th. For those who are staring at me quizzically, the earlier message was in relation to November 3rd. This is in relation to November 6th. There are two separate messages for two separate and discrete days of absence from duty. So that need to be read into the record, as you will see them reflected in the minutes of the meetings whenever the President is not at duty or someone is acting. They're formally read into the record of the Parliament. So it's important to correct that. And we're this morning and not seeing the second message, even though it was here before that. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, having come to the end of government's business for the day, I wish to thank all honorable senators for their contributions today, and I beg to move that the Senate be suspended sine die.
Adjourned. The question is that the Honorable the Senate be now adjourned sine die. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Accordingly, the Honorable the Senate is adjourned sine die.